program might contain strong language. If you think you may be offended, switch off now.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Inside Mojo podcast, where each week we take a look at another key moment in WatchMojo's 20-year history on YouTube. I am your host, Rob, and with me as always is WatchMojo's CEO and co-founder, Ashkan Karbasrushan. What's up, Ash? We're on episode 5 out of a planned 20. How's it going so far?
It's going great. I'm rather excited, nervous, anxious about tonight's game, Canada-USA. So
yes, the hockey as it were. It should be exciting.
We'll see what happens.
Great. So this week we're talking about the 4 pillars that hold up WatchMojo as a company. Let's preview what those 4 pillars are before we get into them in detail.
Sure. So, I mean, obviously the first pillar is YouTube. We've always talked about the importance of distribution and the right platform. But specifically, that's the distribution. Specifically, I would say just recognizing that geek culture would become pop culture. And then in a few minutes, we could dive into what the hell does that mean? Obviously, I think what made and makes our clips stand out are the clips that we use. So having comfort with navigating relationships with rights holders, but also understanding fair use to knowing like what the rules of engagement should be. And of course, Moses, Wayne's World, Letterman, the top 10 format, which, humans have always been drawn to. And then, frankly, I talk about it a bit less, but if there are any entrepreneur storytellers listening, is to kind of be true to yourself. And I think I kind of embrace the storyteller role, not just an entrepreneur, but actually really, really liking content and stories. And then kind of like figuring out a path for myself where I could kind of use that muscle.
Cool. Before we continue, I'd just like to let the audience know that we have a poll that's going up on our YouTube channel. So we would like to know, after YouTube, what is your preferred location for watching videos? Is it Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, or X? Or if there's another option, leave that in the comments. We'd like to know, outside of YouTube, where are you watching the most content? And I'd also like to remind everybody who's watching live that if you have any questions, please leave those in the comments and we'll address them as they come in.
I'm surprised no OnlyFans, considering how popular that platform is.
Yeah, that might be another category.
That might be another day.
Yeah.
That's Inside Mojo of another nature.
After dark or something. Yeah.
There you go.
So at what point did you know that you had found the product market and fit for WatchMojo?
Sure. So, I mean, in startups, talk about product market fit, and content, I always describe it as platform format fit. Look, many times, there was like a couple times as an entrepreneur, you tend to be an optimist. And I was like, oh, yeah. I remember once vividly, we had this distribution partner. I think it was called ROO, ROO. And we thought like, wow, our videos are being seen finally by all these people, literally because we needed to render and encode the videos and publish them faster. We bought a whole machine just for that. And then like a month later found out it was fraud. Like there were no real views. There was no humans. So that was a bit of a letdown. It was not a light at the end of the tunnel, but another oncoming train. And then like, I think around 2010-ish, we had like basically started to, for distribution, embed our videos and put them in like a player. And then other publishers could include this on their website. We just called it a widget. So this syndicated player was one of the first times, like after 4 years, where I was like, oh, wow, there's revenue. If you are USA Today and you take our videos and you have like travel to Madrid and you put that next to or inside of a what to do in Madrid, over a weekend, we were like, that might be really interesting. But again, it was kind of bullshit because I realized that like a lot of these publishers were embedding our videos where ads were supposed to be. So it wasn't really content. It was just this distraction.
Okay.
So I won't lie. I think sometime around 2011 and 12, I could see us finally really having, I would say, finding our purpose or calling in everything that is factual. Like, as I said, I love to cook. I remember like Rebecca making fondue, or, we had like experts coming in giving like fashion and style advice. That I was like, okay, it's interesting how we could produce these videos. But I remember like Yahoo once featured our Martin Luther King biography on Martin Luther King Day.
Oh, cool.
We had a distribution deal with them. And I was like, okay, this is something. Or like if you had like, I don't know, the 50-year anniversary of the United Nations, and we had a video on that. I was like, okay, this seems to be shared. And then, yeah, I think I ultimately realized we found product market fit once I saw how much things like origins or the lists that we would do on pop culture and, fandom and IP, like whether it was Batman, Superman, Ozzy Osbourne, Seinfeld, we ourselves were really fans of these topics. And I myself was super passionate growing up on, researching and reading all these things. So it took a while. It took 5-6 years. But I think once we kind of saw an audience on YouTube really engage with our fandom and then more and more lists, it was pretty clear that, like, they used to say this about Rupert Murdoch. He was never the first entrepreneur to see something. But they were like, once he is sold on something, get out of his freaking way, because he's just going to mobilize. And I kind of did the same thing. Once I realized that there was a there, we then really grew, and we, like, our staff went from 5 to 10 to 10 to 25 within a year, and then we hit 75 like 2 years later.
You've described 2011 as being kind of a fork in the road. Tell me about that. How did you go through the process of finding your product market fit during that time period?
Yeah, I mean, so as I said, we had some success, like even being one of the first digital creators to have a licensing deal with Hulu. That's not bad. We were probably the only company that Fox's MySpace was guaranteeing revenue. It was only $5,000 a month. But I mean, at that point, not that many people were making $60,000 from one distribution partner. So for me, if we go through this is a nice little image that I use in presentation. Is I actually think the way Jeff Bezos says that every day is day one, you constantly find yourself in a fork in the road. Like the way I react to if you say something or if somebody else sends an email, that's a fork in the road. You could take the high road, or you could take, So if we were to kind of go through the stack here, so for us, I would say that the most important thing was just kind of like not holding out for what our preference was. The first one really was the platform. We've talked about it, fish where the fish are, skate to where the puck is going. So I think what set us apart, and I think if you're an entrepreneur or a storyteller today, you could, like, the way others wanted to build a website like 20 or 15 years ago, and I was like, this isn't where the world is going. The world is on YouTube. I think today there could be a lot of people that are like, oh, I want to be a YouTube creator. But you might be better served actually thinking, well, maybe I should focus on Snap or TikTok or X. X is like a very nascent, relatively speaking, new platform when it comes to video. I'll sometimes publish an article, just randomly something I'll post on LinkedIn. I'll also post it on X. And I'm like, how did this get 18,000 views? It's because there is a big audience. And it's like anything else, if you catch lightning in a bottle. So for us, it always starts really, really macro, right? So at the end of the day, YouTube, I realized myself that I was as a consumer, as a user, I was turning to YouTube to look for content. And I used to listen to a lot of like live bootlegs, old concerts, old Randy Rhoads grainy footage, old Led Zepp concerts and Queen and stuff like that. And to me, it was just clear that this was going to be the platform, right? So then it was like programming for it. And as early as like 2006, even when YouTube was just a year old, it was clear to me that, like, well, this site could be it was like this platform could be profitable. So we've alluded to this already. I think, for YouTube, in terms of inflection points, just to give something different, because we've covered this on previous shows, but for me, YouTube had maybe like a handful of inflection points. So obviously, the Google acquisition is huge. Like things like Flash Video, I mean, that was always part of it. But I think the Google acquisition was far and away the game changer for them. Second, I think the lawsuit forced them to introduce Content ID, which as much was a bane and a big crowbar up my ass for a decade, unreasonably. Hey, it is true. Facts. I think that forced them to introduce Content ID and then get everybody to play along, where at least we knew what the rules of engagement were. TrueView, huge. TrueView, by virtue of telling users skip ad, like you gave the power now to viewers to skip an ad, to choose what ads you wanted to sit through, and also obviously what content to watch. So that was a big game changer. And then I think at some point, YouTube was like, I would say right now, mainstream is talking about it, how it's become more of a mainstream platform. But for me, probably sometime around 2015, 16 was when I was like, okay, YouTube seems to basically be like the new television. And it was really just more of a matter of other people realizing that or not.
Right. So you identified early on that there was massive potential here. And when it became really clear to everybody that YouTube is now like the top dog in terms of online video, then what? Like, how did your approach change?
Sure. So yeah, every successful media voice brand is actually really, really focused on one thing. Wall Street Journal used to be a print newspaper. Now it's like a website covering, business news. MTV was music videos on cable. ESPN was sports on cable. PewDiePie was Let's Play. So I had to kind of like talk to the team. And I think this is where communications and culture is a bit of a challenge sometimes because, obviously, clearly everybody liked doing a little bit of something. Like we might have had a team member that really liked style and fashion and beauty, and getting them to do less of that was a bit of a challenge. Like Rebecca, whom we all love and respect, the WatchMojo lady, she used to do cooking videos, because she liked to bake and I love to cook. So I was like, this is great. But, there was a moment when I was like, okay, this is all wonderful, but like, can we look objectively at like the passion around the comment section when we do, Superman versus Batman versus do you use olive oil or canola? You know what I mean? Like clearly
There's a difference there.
and one is called service journalism, which is very utilitarian. Like when I'm cooking, sometimes I'm like, shit, do I fry the onions first or do I brown the ground beef first, even though I should know that? It's quick. You don't really almost care what the source is.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to know, like, okay, what are the greatest Arcade Fire songs, I may trust WatchMojo's judgment because I'm like, they've researched it and it's pretty exhaustive. So it was really more of an organizational challenge of communicating and explaining why we're going to go and just do, and also not just fandom, because I love doing biographies and profiles, but we also had to kind of like let go of our own egos, my own, and being like, you know what, people really, really, care about lists. So let's just do lists.
Right. And so the list speaks to the different formats, the variety of different formats that exist on YouTube, but also in media in general. So what is it that spoke to you about lists in particular? I know that was a big, that you were a big fan of that format from the beginning.
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying again, let's say today you're an up-and-coming storyteller entrepreneur, you do need to just be realistic of all the different categories and all the different styles and formats, because otherwise, like, again, like this is obvious stuff to people who work in media, but I, not having worked in media, had to learn about a lot of this stuff and also like quantify it just as I was giving presentations. So as I said, it was pretty clear that things like health, things like cooking, even travel, two things were going to happen very quickly. One, user-generated content with technology becoming more powerful and the democratization of these platforms and no barriers to entry. And that whole service journalism bucket, I was like, this is going to become just like a commodity. At the end of the day, whether it's Bon Appetit or Shea, recipes by Jolene, I'm like, it's the same crap, right? Whether somebody puts a cinnamon stick or cinnamon powder in their tomato sauce recipe, let's be honest, nobody's going to build a $1 billion brand that audiences are going to care about that way. So for us, entertainment, I just was like, okay, if we want to be in the entertainment pop culture lane, let's just be candid. If you're covering existing successful franchises, our mission is half as challenging now.
Yeah.
Yes, we absolutely want to be the tastemakers and the curators who tell people, oh, you should watch this, or if you like X, you'll like Y. But it was also just practically like a lot easier to be like, hey, these are franchises that are pretty popular. We should do it. So categories was both our passion, interest, skill set, comparative advantage, all those nice buzzwords. But it was also just like objectively realizing, well, look, if, House of Cards is really popular, we should cover it because there's a fandom and we're serving them. And the challenge of Hollywood is that, which is if you're trying to build your own House of Cards, great. And I'd love to if I'm not running WatchMojo, but then you're in the hits business. It's very binary. And then with the style, for me, yeah, I don't want to lie. I just had zero interest in watching these creators sit on their couch and talking about, Chicago. I was like, show me the skyline, show me the streets, right? And so we started out, for me, it was like I thought I had pay dirt when we would reach out to tourism boards and chambers of commerce and be like, hey, we'd love to do a video on Houston or Berlin or Barcelona or whatever. And these tourism boards would just mail us DVDs, and I would just go and open them. And I was like, it was like I'd struck gold, because I was like, well, we're not going to hire a helicopter to travel around the Statue of Liberty, but if New York tourism has some videos, and it's interesting because at the time, these were not readily available on websites, so they did mail you beta tapes and DVDs. But again, to me, clip-based was key. And ironically, I admit that today, clip-based content is like the lowest hanging fruit. Anybody could technically do it. Yes, there's color correction and a lot of other stuff to make sure your videos look good. But that's also the evolution, right? That like at the time, that was like the filet mignon. Nobody wanted talking head videos. Lists, I think we've covered it enough. The main thing was not just seeing the data, but just recognizing conceptually that like people were going to watch a lot of content if it was list-based, even if they weren't super passionate. But, the only person who's going to sit and watch like Forrest Whitaker's biography are like his hardcore fans, but top 10 Forrest Whitaker movies, probably a lot of people would watch that. They're like, hey, what is something that he stood out for? So for me, people always make fun of me that I always talk about cooking and I love cooking, but the analogies between cooking, bringing together ingredients to create a recipe, and entrepreneurship is spot on. It's the same thing, I don't mean this in a bad way, Rob. You are like an ingredient to me. Whether you're like
take it badly.
It's a great thing. Whether you're celery or white or wine or like the lamb, you're all essential. But without a single ingredient, even like just sometimes tomato paste, the food's not the same, right? So it's the same concept.
That's a great point. So tell me more about building a team. Like, what's the balance that you have to strike when building a team to work on stuff like this? I know that, we've spoken before about how you work with the team that you have and not the team that you want. So like, how did that factor in and help your content develop?
So I think entrepreneurs really need to ask themselves, and storytellers as well, like this actually applies to Hollywood more. It's like, you do have to ask yourself, like, are you in this for ego? Are you in this for vanity? Is it your pride? Or do you want to win? And it's okay. You could be somebody that's like, I want to be the star. I want to be, the spotlight's on me. It's all about me. I would not want to work with those people because it's just the amount, and I could say this now as I'm older, the amount of energy, brain power, therapy that goes on to get that person to be part of a team. Fuck that. I don't need that now at like 46 there. I wouldn't put up with, Julianne Moore. Why would I put up with Julianne, unknown? You know what I mean? Like, it's just so in 2006, 7, 8, we would get people coming in who sometimes were like, I want to be a star. And I was very gracious and polite and patient. But with some of these people, it's like, but you're not a star. And this isn't the way it works. We can't make you into a star. It's like ultimately the amount of commitment, patience, persistence, repetition. I'm like, that's what it'll take for you to be a star. So some people were really, really a lot more about themselves. And that was fine. And I was like, more power to you. But I was like, I want to build a team. I want to build an organization. I want to build a company that's built to last. So you did have to kind of like identify people who obviously had a skill set, something that you need. That's not rocket science. I personally also look for people that had a bit of a chip on their shoulder because I had one. I wanted to prove myself. But you also really wanted people that believed in some of the parts, that like we will be more potent as a collective and we'll put up with a little bit of people's like vanity. But I used to tell them, if I don't have a fucking ego, why do you have an ego? And I used to be a lot more diplomatic about it. But to this day, I'm like, if I still think I am a humble student that can learn so much, I'm like, what is it that skill set that you have? What portion of your resume am I blanded to that I don't see? But at the time, again, you want to attract, so you're a bit more patient. But now it's easier to kind of spot those people and realize like, yeah, this person's going to be a toxic, hot mess from day one, and you just kind of cut them out. And frankly, look, I mean, in life, you're going to come across a lot of hollow hypocrites. You know, you're going to come across a lot of people who talk a big game. This quote that comes up every time, on the verge of America and Canada going to war. But yeah, no. So, but I also kind of realized that I had to build a strategy around the team. You know, like in general, like Hollywood is funny. You could, like, we have a very creative team, but Hollywood does not view our people as creatives with a capital C, which be like a director or like an actor or a screenwriter. That's what Hollywood views as creatives in that sense, you know. Same thing with talent. We have an extremely talented team, but Hollywood and their stupid, backwards, old gatekeeper model, they don't view like the people that, let's say, work at most YouTube channels and in digital as like talent. They view actors as talent and writers as talent, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, bring it on. We're going to destroy that because that is so antiquated, and we'll build programming that audiences will care about. But you do have to be careful not to build a business for yesterday's opportunity.
Yeah. Not to go backwards, but I'm just curious about this idea of people's egos and that factoring into how you built your team and everything. And considering that in the early days of YouTube, on camera wasn't exactly as high profile or like, you know, highly regarded as it is today with all of the huge creators and influencers that we have, and that it was more about like B-roll and high quality video editing. But
that's not true, though, to be fair. That's
okay.
Not
how so?
Well, actually, so to be fair, I've always said that if we would have had the success we had from 2012 to 17, in like 2006 to 10, we would actually not be here. And I'll explain. Because that was the early phases. So we actually came, and because there were too many talking heads on camera talking about stuff, whether it was like Ray William Johnson, Phil DeFranco, some of whom are still around and they've gone burnt out, come back to their credit. But actually YouTube early on was all about talking head. It was all just some guy or gal sitting and talking. And I've said, I don't mean this in a bad way. It might have been somebody who was of a certain skin color or a bit overweight, or maybe a member of the LGBT community that was basically always shunned and rejected from Hollywood. So that was the great part of YouTube, that, hey, just because some casting director, some failed actress who's now casting director somewhere says, oh, this guy's a bit overweight, or that girl is gay, or this, you know, guy has got a lisp, fuck that casting director. You could build your own audience. You could engage with community. But because I had to make a decision, okay, I could do the odd video, but I was like, I don't want to spend every day vlogging. And I wasn't interested. I was so not interested in like building that kind of business. I wanted to build a company. So we were kind of very much going against the grain. And we did have a lot of YouTubers, but mainly a lot of commenters on YouTube who were like, oh, this looks a bit like TV. You know, we want talking head. And I was like, no. I was like, fuck you. Go watch the talking head, people. This is for those people that don't want that. There are some people that don't want to see 800-pound gal talking about her Chicago trip. I was like, that audience also exists. We're not here to bash that girl, but we don't want to be that girl. We want to do something that looks and feel very different. And we did go through all these different eras. You know, the first few years were really just trying to survive. And then, yeah, in the second kind of era, we kind of knew YouTube. So we were like, let's just grow. And then like everything else, if you don't reinvest, you die. So then we kind of, after a decade, reinvented ourselves. And I've broken all this down because I think it's very disingenuous to make it seem like we were an overnight success. You know what I mean? The reality is it's a story of persistence and resilience more than just, oh, we got lucky. We were here at the right time.
Yeah, totally. Well, the title of your book, not to kiss your ass, I'm reading it right now, but the 10-year overnight success kind of says it all.
Haven't you suffered enough with these podcasts? Which were your idea, by the way, technically. But
it's very interesting. Well, I mean, like I mentioned this in episode 1, I missed a lot of years with WatchMojo, so I got some catching up to do. But
that's
it's very
why you have hair like that, and I have hair like this.
Maybe we'll see how I look in 5 years from now.
While you're looking in the mirror.
So digging deeper into the pillar of lists, there was that period of 6-7 years of experimentation where you deficit financed everything, didn't have any brand deals, but you kind of kept your head down and kept going. So what did you see to keep you on that path and develop in the direction that you did?
We didn't have brand deals, but today, no, I'm kidding. This is just for tonight. Just because I'm
Today's
Screaming.
episode sponsored
I'm
by.
screaming at the Kachuk brothers there. I'll be eating some sour kids. Sorry. Repeat the question. Oh, yeah, brand deals. What was the question again? I just got distracted like the child that I am.
With all the years of experimenting and tinkering, like how did that ultimately culminate in like a clear direction?
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that I was either wrong or not right, and I kind of admit, and I iterated. But to me, the one thing that was always clear was there was always going to be a monetization before, during a video. And it was like pretty obvious that the most likely would be what is a pre-roll. So for me, it was admittedly all about the content, as I call them, the stories, but it was still building an evergreen, like permanent catalog that wouldn't lose value, that becomes really just like a touch point with viewers all over the web. So that as the field of dreams, if you build it, they will come. The idea was, look, let's just take every celebrity. Let's start with the A-listers. So let's do a biography on Brando, a biography on De Niro. Then let's do their top 10s. Then we could do verses. So there was like this roadmap in my head, very clear. And the idea was, look, Marlon Brando, if he's not dead, will be dead soon. He's not going to do new movies. So that biography is technically going to be good for another 5-10 years. Now, yes, SD paved the way for HD, 4K, whatever. But the theory was very smart, which was just build an evergreen catalog. And then as you start, like you're building these pipes effectively that either you're laying down or you're kind of virtually tapping into, if it was YouTube's pipes. And then the idea was water or advertising would eventually flow through these pipes. And if we have content that is ours, then we would be able to build a business as people saw these. It was like a brilliant model. But again, it wasn't like day one. It was like, yeah, if you want to take 5 years, 6 years to be, just struggling, eventually good things could happen, but you may die, in between.
Right. And like you've said that to be successful in media, you really need to focus. So was that part of the ultimate decision to double down on lists? Like how did that end up happening?
Yeah, so I really, as I've said this, I really didn't want to focus on lists. I did not want to be known as the list guy. I was like, I'm an author, I'm written articles. And again, those are insecurities and ego, and we all have it. You have to manage it. But, I also really enjoy hiring people and paying them more and paying bonuses, right? I mean, that ultimately, in hockey, you want to hoist Stanley Cup, but you also like to get a bonus for hitting a certain milestone. It's human nature. So for me, it was like, okay, Ash, you really killed yourself to retain the team. At the end of the day, everybody will be more successful if you like accept your destiny. If you recognize like, what is this one thing that you're better at than anybody else? And so, yeah, I'm kind of like many before us, Wall Street Journal as a business newspaper, Time as a magazine covering current affairs, TED Talks as an in-person event, Huffington Post, a magazine covering politics, PewDiePie, a YouTube series with Let's Play. I've referenced MTV, ESPN, many others. It was pretty clear to us that like, well, Ash, one thing is working inordinately better than anything else. So give the audience what they want. And it's a bit like when you go to like a concert, like I'll use Def Leppard. If I go to a Def Leppard concert, I'd love it if they give me deep cuts from High and Dry and Pyromania. And I understand you might want to play one song from your new album, but imagine if they just go on with like, we're playing our new album back cover to cover or back to back.
Yeah.
I'd be like, no, give me a Mirror Mirror, give me Coming Under Fire, give me White Lightning, give me the stuff that might be from your best era, right? And so that was my message to the team. I was like, let's just, even like, I would be like, just give the people right away. Number 10, go into it instead of like, welcome to WatchMojo, subscribe, tickle my butt, scratch my ass. It's like, but I got it. Like those are best practices, bullshit best practices that kind of people do on YouTube. But to me, it was very pioneering. It wasn't like a 60-minute documentary on Ozzy. It was just like, here's 10 minutes of the best of Ozzy. And then if you like this, go watch all his freaking, repertoire as he's pissing at the Alamo or eating a bat or whatever.
Right.
Or a dove.
I imagine that probably gets tiresome for major artists to be like just playing the same songs year after year. How does it feel 20 years on to be still producing the same types of videos and, with the knowledge that the platform is evolving, audiences are evolving? How does the content continue to evolve also?
Well, again, you have to know your limitations. This week, there was an email. Some people were talking about apple cider vinegar, and I was like, "Oh, that would be an interesting list. It's really healthy."
Back to the cooking.
No, yeah, no, but then
circle.
they're like, "Hey, Boomer, I'm a Gen X." They're like, "Hey, Boomer, it's a show. It's not what you think it is." I was like,
Right.
"Okay, great." But the idea was early on, like we brought on one of our teammates, Mike, because I knew a lot about movies, but the kid had grown up like working in a like a Blockbuster style store. So I was like, I'm pretty sure he's gonna know. Way back when we brought on Dan and Rebecca, who were a couple of our VO folks, it was because Dan was more into gaming than I was. So I just trusted people, that would be experts. And I've said it, if it was up to me, every other list would be Seinfeld or Ozzy Osbourne, right? Or Paul Oakenfold or Wu-Tang Clan. So the idea was you do need to bring, and this is what I love about WatchMojo, which is most other organizations, youth, like inexperience is frowned upon. They're like, go get a coffee. I've never asked anybody to go get me a coffee. Like I'm like, youth, show us the way. What are these new shows, kids? Steve Buscemi with the skateboard. Like, what shows are you watching, kid? So I like that about the company. So it does always, like, I love that. I love creating opportunities for young people. Whether or not they are awake enough to take it, that's up to them. And I support them either way. But I like that. The other one is what really drives me more and more is just, again, the organizational. I like marketing. I like finance. I like strategy. I like partnerships. I like it all. So that is always a new thing. Like that every day is a bit different, even if there's obviously patterns. And you have to let go. Like, I still effectively wear the editor-in-chief hat occasionally, but you do have to let go. You do have to understand that there's fandom in areas you don't really, it's not your forte.
Do you see any white spaces in terms of like other formats that we haven't really tapped into?
Formats or categories, or is it open, or do you want to go?
Well, I'd say anything, but specifically formats, like list being a format and any other type of videos.
So we didn't execute it to the extent I would have, which was Innovator's Dilemma, a lot of things, not blaming any, like, if anything, it's my fault. I think trivia I saw as a white space a few years ago. I think trivia could work. There was a lot of trivia out there, but that's an area that I felt could make sense. This isn't so much format because a lot of them are done. And I've already said it, like I love interviews, but you're not going to sit down and be like, Tiger, take me through that time when you decided to have sex with like 100 hoochies in a year. What were you thinking? He's like, yeah, this is over. So interviews, I still think like Hot Ones, to their credit, they took a very simple thing, the interviews, and a very simple premise of just ever hotter wings.
Right.
And they kind of found their product market fit, their format platform fit. But it was also the quality of the guests. Yes, in season one, maybe they had some unknowns who actually gave it a good, authentic vibe. But those memeable moments with Charlize Theron, Shaq, or the guy who never ages, Paul Rudd, like that's the quality of the access you get. And again, you have to realize year 3 and 4, you could do that. I do think, even though I'm not a big like Star Trek, NASA space guy, I do think if like Elon Musk and SpaceX continue to popularize, mainstreamify space exploration, I do absolutely think that vertical of space and science has some legs. I'm not saying I'm the guy to do it. And like a decade ago, we bought Unveiled, which was like the only time we bought a small channel. And it was because I was like, yeah, this space, as my dog is going crazy in the background, she's getting ready for tonight's matchup. So I think space could work. I think that is an area. The podcast you started that I used to call on UFOs, you call it UAPs. For some reason, they decided to rebrand. Like the most recognizable acronym to describe this, all of a sudden, let's change it. Okay, that makes a ton of sense. But I do think that is also an area because, again, if 15 years ago when I was like, let's do top 10 conspiracies, and I would suggest like aliens, number 3, people would look at me like, oh shit, I work for a crazy guy. Now, they're like, what is your favorite aliens, to talk to? And I'm like, oh, okay, things have changed, So, and I'm not saying I'm a believer, but I'm just saying it's no longer seen like quack hour. I don't know. What do you see? Maybe I should be asking you. Is there an opening, a white space that you're like either format or category?
I don't know. I'm happy that we're giving podcasts a chance. I do think that there's opportunity there because I don't see a lot of companies like ours delving into that realm. It seems to be like a lot more individuals starting podcasts, but not so much media companies like WatchMojo. So I think
Why do you think that is, though? I'll tell you the real reason why that is.
I don't know. I'm curious to know what you think.
So most people are just not that, and I'm not saying I am or you are, but most people are just not that good to carry a conversation. Let's just be honest. Again, I'm not 20 where everybody could do anything. Most people just can't talk for 2 minutes, let alone an hour. They either don't have the knowledge base, or they're not authentic, or they have no charisma, as my mother-in-law used to say. They're just not charismatic. It's just watching paint dry.
Right.
Well, that's one thing. The other thing is, look, you need, like, let's say if you get 1,000 video views, and let's say you can get $5 for 1,000 views, that's $5 of revenue. So that's a video. Most podcasts get like 13 downloads, and that's, you and your friend and your family. Yes, everybody talks of Joe Rogan. Again, Joe Rogan, 10-year overnight success. He's been doing it for a decade.
Yeah.
So for us who are strong at video, who generate a lot of views and who generate decent revenue, podcasts is like the poor man's version of a video. If you think about it, this is less. No, don't be offended.
I don't know. I'm not sure I agree with you on that one.
From an economic perspective, look, from holding a conversation for an hour, it's a more elevated art form. That I agree. I used to do radio, and even I was like, man, these people that host a show for 3 hours, who could talk alone, who could bring on the guest, and who could get callers, that to me was like quite the art form. And it takes time to develop that. So I don't mean it in that sense. What I'm saying is this podcast, especially when they were audio only, didn't have video. So it was like a less premium version of videos. So if you ran the New York Times and you had a one-dimensional media, just articles, by adding podcasts, you were going from one dimension, text, to information plus audio. So now you're 2 dimensions. Video, sight, sound, motion is the holy grail. It's the filet mignon.
Yeah.
So most people in my shoes would be like, fuck podcasts. We're not doing podcasts. It's like we're bringing ourselves down, which is the near-term bad way of thinking. So we're doing this because, this is like a different format. It's a totally different thing. I'd love it if the YouTube fans watch this and like it, but it's admittedly, as we've discussed, to branch out on new territory. So from a technical economic perspective, it is seen as less premium.
Gotcha. I guess it's different for me because I associate podcast with video because I'm always watching them on YouTube. I like to see the people, and oftentimes they intercut, things that they're talking about.
You're a millennial?
Yeah, 1990.
That makes sense. No, that totally makes sense. That if I were to speak to a Gen Z or Alpha, that's a very different. Neither one is right or wrong, but like I'm a Gen X, but like to us, like podcasts were around forever. It's just more recent, and then even more recent is this concept of video podcasts, which is fairly nascent, if we're going to be honest.
Yeah. Looking forward to see what we can do to continue developing in that direction. Before we get into our third pillar, which is geek culture, I want to touch on the poll results that we got in. So we asked, outside of YouTube, what is your preferred platform to watch videos? 36% said Instagram, 31% said Facebook, 22% said X, and 9% said TikTok. So
fascinating. That's very
Instagram leading the pack there.
The irony is our biggest distribution platform after YouTube is Snap.
Right.
But Snap is a bit more of a walled garden, whereas this is a bit more loose, anything goes. So not
Snap was like all the rage, I don't know, maybe like 5 to 10 years ago, I think. But I haven't heard as much.
Are you calling me old? No, I'm kidding.
I think I'm calling myself old because that's, that's when I was using it. But
no, I'm kidding.
Cool. So geek culture, this is the third pillar, and this is where WatchMojo really found its home, especially as you said, you saw the Disney acquisition of Marvel, and the writing was kind of on the wall. Geek culture was going to become mainstream, and I don't even think it's really considered geek culture anymore. It's more or less just mainstream pop culture.
It's mainstream. Yeah. I mean, exactly. We've talked about like the Disney acquisitions, and I talked about how I was talking to creators who may use this idea I had called Trade Mojo, where people could exchange IP or match, like, I'm a writer and you're an animator and let's work together. It's like, great, somebody do it now. It could work. But when I was talking to that, I was like, my God, there's a lot of this cohort group of really passionate comic book fans that are just like, from a demographic perspective, are just becoming in this ripe age of early 20s, mid 20s, 30s. And yeah, it was, Michael Milken says the best investor is a social scientist. I think anybody listening to this that is trying to figure out like what their calling is, what their purpose is, and then marry it to an opportunity, you really, really need to just be aware of what's happening. I think if somebody were to come today and be like, oh, I'm going to start like a channel to cover, the latest shows on Netflix, I'd be like, man, it's such a shame. Like there's so many new things and themes to cover that are not saturated. Go for that. But basically, the best example, Big Bang Theory was a show on CBS, broadcast TV. It was the #1 rated show. But, all these kids who were, comic book readers, they ended up just running Madison Avenue, Wall Street, Hollywood, and Silicon Valley. So you have to be on the lookout for that. You really, really have to say, hey, it's 2025, not what is the opportunity today. Where are things going to be in 2027, 2028, 2029, even 2030? Because everything takes 3, 4, 5 years. And then that's what you got to focus on. Whether it's content or a client base, you could be launching an app, nothing to do with content, just like a utility, but you have to serve an audience that is actually growing and emerging. You can't be chasing yesterday's back.
Another thing that I find cool is that you can kind of trace the trajectory of through the way that we've covered it with our videos. Like our Marvel MCU videos were 2012, 13, 14 than they are now. Same thing. Might have been the greatest Star Wars characters of all time. Now it's like a Star Wars movie that everybody hates, So it's kind of like a brand has evolved through the way that our video coverage has evolved.
Yeah, I mean, when Marvel always alluded to Ant-Man, I was like, that's really niche. But like even the Avengers, I was like, what? So they're just giving up on the old crew and they're just introducing, and they're like, even to me, that sounded crazy, but it was just because of the saturation. They had to reinvent themselves. Otherwise, who cares about the 18th Spider or whatever Batman movie or whatnot?
Yeah, I would be remiss if I did not give a shout out to the documentary that we produced called How Geek Culture Became Pop Culture, I believe. We should, I'll make sure to provide a link to that in the description of this video because everybody should check that out if they're interested. It's a really great doc that we put together highlighting the importance of geek culture in basically pop culture. So where are we now? Your other passion was on your primary passion was entrepreneurship, but you also wanted to have the team. Tell me more about this.
Yeah, I mean, I just personally had a choice and a path after my old job to pursue basically becoming an influencer, creator, whatever you want to call it. And I mean, I cannot say anything that repulsed me more, to be perfectly honest. Like, I know I'll do this podcast, I'll write out there. It's just not to keep the garbage in my head. It's just expression so that you have a clear thought. It's a bit like Freud and dreams. When you sleep, you process emotions, feelings, and you do feel better. And to me, these forms of expression are, sure, informative to some, hopefully, but that's it. But I don't really have any desire to be like a star. Like, to me, that's zero interest. I really, really, really did want to be like the CXO. Like I wanted to be the CEO, but I wanted to be involved in sales partnerships. And I really needed the team. And so you do have to find, like, I would say, I don't want to be like 80% of entrepreneurship, but 50% of entrepreneurship is the soft stuff. It's not your IQ, it is the EQ. It's not your skills, but it's how you can attract talent. It's like how you then coalesce with others and gel. But you then also do start bringing a lot of people who are maybe a bit more driven by vanity, or their own ego is a bit more out of control. And that's fine, right? Because as an entrepreneur, you're in it to create value. You're in it to be long-term greedy. So you do swallow your ego, like, again, like you'll hire an intern and the intern will say something. And as an entrepreneur, you have a thick skin. You don't really take it personally, but you do see when you start building a team that a lot of it is how these fuckers get along together. And I say fuckers in the most affectionate way ever.
In the most loving way possible.
And no, but it is the most loving way. But you're like, wow, these two are going to kill one another. And either you got to separate them and just say there's no room for you, or you're like, okay, you go play maybe as a running back on the offense, you go play cornerback, so you're never even on the field together. And I did this for 20 years, and it's something I'm really good at. But obviously, as you get older, you have a bit less patience for it as well, because you're like, yeah, I don't need to put up with this if you're just acting like a moron. It's time for you to, that Nate Bargatze skit on SNL, just get off the boat, just jump off, just it's time to leave.
It must be different in a work from home environment now, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, the work from home environment I've been very much for. I was one of the first to tell everybody to go work from home. I was also a CEO telling CEOs don't to rush RTO, return to office. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest problem now is just the lack of communication and everybody in their own little bubble. We're very lucky that 90% of the team does work well at home. It's not like the work that they do and the tasks that they do is fine. The issue is just more the communication. And I sometimes feel like I'm letting them down in terms of development. Like, are you developing their talents? Are you showing them skills? Are you putting them in situations, meeting situations where they learn, they push back? But I mean, if the team genuinely themselves don't care and they're just like, we're happy working, we're doing our job, at some point you're like, okay, not everybody wants to be a leader. But yeah, work from home absolutely makes it more challenging.
What do you think the next big fandom is going to be? Do you have any predictions for that?
Yeah, so I do think entrepreneurship, the first decade where it really blew up, like with whether it's Succession, the Gary V's, and that whole universe, Shark Tank, I think that was actually early era in a way. I think that was just it kind of like, ta-da, entrepreneurship is here. I think now that all these kids are like, I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to be an investment banker. I want to be a storyteller. That basically means you want to be more of an entrepreneur who happens to be in the media business. So I actually think that whole universe still has a lot of product market fit. Like whether it's, I don't think could be lists. Like I'm not interested in doing lists for entrepreneurs, but like, I did a bunch of documentaries, like ContextTV actually, to be fair, was like, okay, maybe we'll do tips and, take all this bullshit I've learned over the years and might have value to somebody else, even though I'm just, it doesn't change my life to give this advice or not, but it might help some young Ash who's like lost at sea.
Sure.
But so, yeah, I do think the world of entrepreneurship, we already alluded to everything that's space exploration, this and that. Yeah. If you take a look at what's happening with politics, there is clearly a shift, right? I mean, I think before you had like DEI and stuff, you had a lot of abuse and you had a lot of injustice, and then it went to another extreme, and now there's a bit of a balancing. But I mean, all you need to do is just look at what's happening, whether it's Doge. I'm not saying as a vertical, but like questioning governments, not believing whatever your government says, that could be a vertical. It could be an editorial lane for somebody.
Right.
But I think ultimately what I tell people is I go, is there enough here for it to be a replicable thing that you could do not only even 10 or 100 videos, but could you do 1,000? And that's where I feel most of the time people are like, yeah, no. There's not that much content to cover, right? But there always will be. And that's actually the good thing about WatchMojo. We could always cover whatever we want, because if there's a new thing, we could just cover that,
Yep. And we've had pretty good success covering recent trends, which has been exciting, and it keeps the job fresh and fun.
Yep.
One last pillar to go through, which is fair use. And that's a rather big one, but maybe we could just do a quick run through, because it might be worth its own episode all by itself.
Yeah, and we will talk a little bit about fair use in the next episode, and it will come up at a very high level. I think for us, fair use was matching person with opportunity. I think what happened for us was I did always view it as just, okay, this is like a form of expression. I go, this is not that different than like the First Amendment to me, being able to use IP in order to comment and criticize, to me, did feel like one of those things. Like the way people now are like Elon Musk buying X saved democracy. I kind of like roll my eyes, but I understand if he believes that, even if it's a gimmick, if he believes that, if his fans and his supporters believe that, because people do need purpose. People do need something greater than themselves. So for me, especially in those early years, this concept of freedom of expression and all that was actually really, really important, especially as a kid who was born in Iran and came to Canada. I'm like, you motherfuckers take everything for granted. You shouldn't, you know? So to me, that was one. But two, the thing that really pissed me off as like a fighter, as a combative person, is the rights holders were by and large liking our editorial and wanting us to use it. But it was the way that the platforms like YouTube were just kind of like introducing these tools that, and I'm not here to throw YouTube on the bus, I would live in a refrigerator box in a back alley if it wasn't for YouTube. But I was a bit pissed off that I was like, YouTube just has some random employee interpreting the law and just introducing these tools really for their own benefit, which is fine, but pretending like this is the law. So I was like, no, this is not the law. This is your interpretation and implementation of the law to suit you, and that's fine. And I won't lie, as a fighter, I was like, bring it, because I knew what the law was, and I knew that I could get YouTube to reflect the law, and I did. It took a decade, but you know, it was a good little mission.
Yeah, interesting. It's an interesting one because, you know, it is kind of like free publicity for whoever we're talking about. So there's a lot of gray area to be discussed in there. Thank you very much, Ash. This is a great episode. Love talking about WatchMojo's development through the years. Next week, we are looking at WatchMojo's one step forward and one step back, hitting 1 million subs, and the Content ID Christmas gift, which I'm pretty sure ruined your holidays. So looking forward to seeing that one.
Good prediction there.
All right. Well, thanks again, Ash. Thanks for everybody who watched, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers. Go Canada, go.
Go Canada.